All right, let's go ahead and get started. Good morning or afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Sarah Jo, and I'm the training coordinator for the Foundation Center in San Francisco. And I'm also joined by my colleague, Caroline Herbert, who is helping us with technical or background support, and she's based in our Washington, D.C. Library and Learning Center. And I just really want to extend a warm welcome to our session today, Getting a Grip on Your Student Loans with Heather Jarvis. And I suspect some of you are joining us today maybe new to the Foundation Center and to our work. And the Foundation Center is a national nonprofit organization, and our mission is to strengthen the social sector by advancing knowledge about philanthropy in the United States and around the world. And one way we accomplish our mission is through educating thousands of people every year through a full curriculum of training courses, whether that's live in the classroom or online, like our session today. So while we offer free and affordable classes nationwide that really cover the foundation funding research process, mostly for nonprofit organizations, and again, that's around proposal writing, grant makers and their giving, and other related topics, today's session really focuses on the individual. And we're kind of hosting a Funding for Education Month in our San Francisco location, but really wanted to extend this opportunity with our guest speaker, Heather Jarvis, for everyone across the country and really across the globe. And so we're wanted to let you know that you can consider browsing some of our resources for individual grant seekers. And let me just share some of those with you. So those should pop up on the side for you. So those are some resources for individual grant seekers or scholarship seekers at grantspace.org. Today's session will be recorded. Just a few housekeeping tips. It will be posted for future review at GrantSpace. You can download the handouts in the top left-hand corner and have those available for later or for today during today's session. And then with regard to question and answer, Heather will address specific participant questions towards the end of the hour today. And of course, you're welcome to submit your questions anytime through the Q&A chat box as well. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to welcome Heather Jarvis, today's guest speaker. She is a former capital defense attorney with law school debt. Heather now dedicates her expertise to helping student loan borrowers make better decisions so that higher education can be a reality for all and not just those who can afford it. Specializing in training for high debt borrowers and the people who love them, she has provided guidance and information to thousands of students and recent grads. Also contributed to student debt relief policy for the House Education Committee and others in Congress. And she's really spent more than 6 years advocating for public service loan forgiveness. And she's really an expert in this field. So join me in welcoming Heather. And I'll go ahead and put up your slides, and it's the floor is all yours. Thanks so much, Heather.
Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here, and thank you everyone for joining us. I'm pleased to say that there are lots of great programs available for people these days to help you manage your student loan burdens, which is a good thing considering the expense of higher education that we're all facing. So what I thought we'd talk about today are strategies for you to use to figure out how to minimize the cost of your debt. So, anytime you borrow money, the cost of what you're purchasing with that debt is really undetermined until you end up repaying it. So your student loans can cost you more or less depending on the way you manage them over time. And so we'll be talking about how you can figure out what the best thing is for you to do, since we all have somewhat different circumstances. And to get at that, we really need to understand which student loans are which. There are loads of different kinds, and it ends up making a big difference in which repayment options and forgiveness provisions might be available to you. We'll also discuss in some detail the income-driven repayment plans that are available for federal student loans. There's a lot of ins and outs about that, and we'll talk about those. My favorite thing is public service loan forgiveness, which can be fantastic for people who are working in government and nonprofit positions and a few others. We'll talk about the details of that in case that's of interest to you. And as Sarah Jo said, we'll have time for questions and answers. I'm happy to take whatever questions you have, as specific as you want to be. And so really when you're thinking about your own circumstances, you want to bear in mind that, it's really not one size fits all. You've got to figure out a strategy that makes sense for your circumstances. So the first thing to do always is to know exactly what kind of loans you have and what the differences are between your loans. They have all kinds of different design features that go into a good decision-making process. I think everybody ought to evaluate whether or not they qualify for one of the income-driven repayment options. Now, whether or not you want to pursue that option will also be a decision that you'll need to make. But evaluating whether you qualify is a good place to start. And it makes sense to estimate your future income and earnings, to think about your career path, and figure out the extent to which your career expectations and the money you hope to or plan to make will influence your potential to benefit from forgiveness. And then last but certainly not least, I think we all need to reevaluate our decisions every once in a while. When you're making choices about your student loans, I encourage you to, really evaluate and apply your current circumstances into that decision-making process. But then, of course, things change over time. And so particularly when there are big changes like, marriage or job change or other things that have an influence on your finances, it really makes sense to reevaluate and see whether it makes sense to make any changes as you go along. So there are two general categories of student loans. You have your federal student loans and your private student loans. Among the options, I'm not a big fan of private loans. They tend to be more risky and expensive for student loan borrowers. Their terms are always based on the credit worthiness of the individual student loan borrower, and many people, when they're college students, don't have super high credit scores, either because they haven't had a long history of borrowing and repaying money, or also they may not be working full-time when they're students, for example. A lot of times the interest rates on private student loans are variable, so they change over time and are reset on a schedule. Unfortunately, even though those rates might seem low in some cases now that the economy is bad, they are almost certain to go up over time, and sometimes those interest rates have no cap on how high they can get. So if you have private loans, I encourage you to understand what the interest rate is, whether or not it's fixed, or if it's a variable rate. And if it's variable, bear in mind that it's likely to get more expensive over time. The other problem with private loans is that they don't have a lot of the protections and flexibility that we'll be talking about today. Most of the really cool stuff in terms of forgiveness and income-based repayment, that kind of thing, is not available for private student loans. Private student loans tend to have just very specific terms that are set out in the contract. I've got this little visual aid to help people remember my feelings about private student loans, which are the student loans that I find the most scary. Just in case you don't recognize him, this is He Who Shall Not Be Named from the Harry Potter series, and he really, is pretty creepy. So if you're not entirely sure exactly what private loans you may have and you want to get a clear inventory, take a look at your credit report. It's available for you to download for free at annualcreditreport.com. And that's something that makes sense to do periodically anyway, to take a look at your credit report and see what's on there. And there really is no other central database of private student loans. Now, also, the sort of second main category of student loans are federal student loans. And federal student loans have lots of different names. You will see loans called Stafford loans, subsidized loans, unsubsidized loans, Grad Plus, Parent Plus. These are all examples of federal student loans. A subsidized loan is one in which the government pays the interest for you while you're in school and during certain periods of deferment. So those loans are more, advantageous because you may not have to pay the interest in every instance. Unsubsidized Stafford loans are more widely available, therefore everyone, even without a demonstrated financial need. But on those, the interest starts to accrue right away and will be ultimately you will be responsible for repaying it. Parent Plus loans are a little different, and I just wanted to flag them for your attention. The Parent Plus loans are those that you may have borrowed for your children who are in college, or that your parents may have borrowed for you while you were in undergraduate school. And those have some special rules that we won't address in full today due to our limited time. But they are federal student loans. They just tend to have somewhat special treatment. And the same is the case for Perkins loans, which is a federal loan program, but it's administered by schools, and it's what's called a campus-based loan. So Perkins loans are treated a little bit specially too, and I'll bring up a couple of points today when that is the case. So among the federal student loans, what is less well understood, understandably, is that federal student loans used to come from two different sources. So student loan borrowers may have gotten their subsidized loan from the Federal Direct program, as everyone who is borrowing today is doing, or in the past, folks would have gotten their loans potentially from another program called FFEL, that stands for Federal Family Education Loan. And a FFEL loan is a federal loan, but it's different than a direct loan. Direct loans are the only federal loans that are currently being issued. But if you were in school before July of 2010, you may well have some of these older federal loans called FFEL loans. And that's fine, but it's really important that you know and that you understand that there is a difference, because many of us who have those older FFEL loans will have to take a few extra steps in order to access some of the programs we're talking about today. So begin by visiting the National Student Loan Data System. It's online at nslds.ed.gov. You need your federal student aid PIN, it's a 4-digit number, and then you can pull up your federal loan record here, which will show you every federal loan you ever borrowed, and you can tell if it's a direct loan or a FFEL loan, those older FFEL loans, and that's important. Federal loans are flexible in that they have a number of provisions for postponing or delaying repayment in some instances, but that can make the loans cost more over time. So your federal loans have grace periods of typically 6 months or 9 months for Perkins loans. Now, grace period is just a period of time after you get out of school before you have to start making payments. And then deferments and forbearances are ways of avoiding repayment for a period of time. Deferment is slightly preferable because if you do have any of those subsidized loans, the subsidy applies during the deferment periods. And in forbearance, the interest will accrue and you'll be responsible for it during that period. But what is a better thing for a lot of us to think about are these relatively newly available income-driven repayment options. These options can give you affordable payments based on your income, sometimes as low as zero, and really have some advantages that postponing repayment does not. An income-driven forgiveness is something that you want to keep in the back of your mind. So the income-driven repayment plans have forgiveness provisions associated with them, and this is in addition to the availability of public service loan forgiveness that we're going to talk about. Income-driven forgiveness has forgiveness provisions for people who are in the repayment plans over an extended period of time and who make payments on their loans for 20 or 25 years, depending on the plan, and still have a balance outstanding. So that's only going to be the case for people who have relatively high balances on their student loans as compared to their incomes over time. And this is not the same as public service loan forgiveness. This income-driven forgiveness is not tied to employment. Okay, so it's different, notably different in that respect. If you do earn forgiveness under an income-driven plan, bear in mind that any debt that's canceled under these is going to be taxable as income to you, the borrower, in the year in which it is received. So the way that is supposed to work is that, if you get some debt canceled, then that counts. It's almost as if you had earned that money in that year, and it will need to be included on your income tax return, and tax will be assessed on the forgiven amount. Now, there are a number of tax provisions that can complicate matters for us as individuals. There's some insolvency provisions, for example, that could apply. And there are also some efforts to change the law in this regard. And so I encourage you to kind of keep your ears open for that. But I don't want this to take anybody by surprise. And I think it's important to know that debt cancellation can be great, but it could also result in some taxation. Now, certainly the benefit to you is going to be greater, even in light of the taxation, but it's something you'd have to prepare for and plan for. Now let's talk some about these income-driven options. The federal loan programs have three different income-driven repayment options available to folks. We're going to focus today on income-based repayment and pay-as-you-earn, two distinct programs. I won't talk much except now in passing about the income contingent repayment plan. Income contingent repayment is an older one that it just isn't as generous for most people, and so we won't focus on it, but it is one of the ones that is available. But income-based repayment or pay-as-you-earn are typically better for most people. In order to choose either of these options, either income-based repayment or pay-as-you-earn, you have to have a certain debt-to-income ratio. So you don't necessarily have to have a very low income, but you have to have a sort of dramatic difference between the amount you owe versus how much you earn. And some people can earn quite a lot and still qualify. It just depends on your debt balance. So I started my interest in student loans, like many of us, by borrowing a lot of money to finance my education. I graduated from Duke University School of Law, and by the time I was out, I had borrowed $125,000 in student loans, which these days is not even particularly impressive for people who have graduate and professional degrees. But back in the day, it was kind of precocious. So, and I was going to show you all this this poll. I've got a poll here, and I'm looking, Sarah, to see how to launch it, because I don't know if I'm supposed to do that or if... Oh, look at you, taking care of everything. Fabulous. So let me know about how much you owe on your student loans, and that way I can tailor my comments and they'll be more useful for you all. As I said, I borrowed about $125,000. I talk to people every day who have more than $200,000 in student loan debt, so you're certainly not alone. So if you want to tell us, go for it. And then we'll close the poll here in just a moment. Cool. All right, so let's show you the results of the poll. It looks like an interestingly even distribution of borrowing. We've got folks at sort of every level, which is which is interesting, certainly. Okay. All right, so thank you for sharing that information. All right, so thinking about how much you owe, which we just talked about, you've got to have this partial financial hardship to choose income-driven repayment plan, both income-based and pay-as-you-earn. Here's an example of how these numbers play out. There are calculators online and that are referred to in your materials that I also recommend for you. But if you look here, you can see that a person who owes about $50,000 in student loans, for example, would have to have an income of, about 60 some in order to qualify to choose income-based repayment. And this is for a person who has a family size of only one. It's going to vary depending on the family size and the income. And I'll show you some more examples about that. And the reason for it is that both income-based repayment and pay-as-you-earn calculate your monthly payments by looking at your adjusted gross income and your family size. And adjusted gross income is going to be determined based on your federal tax return. And so people who are married will have to include their spouse's income if they filed a joint federal tax return with their spouse. Whereas if you choose to file a separate federal tax return, or if you are not married, so you file as an individual, or if the federal government does not recognize your marriage and you file as an individual, then you need not include your spouse's income. So married people have tricky tax decisions to make. Most people choose to file joint tax returns when they are permitted to because there are tax benefits associated with that. But there might be significant student loan benefits associated with filing separately. So that's something that is really worth taking into account. There are certainly some negative consequences of filing separately. For example, you lose access to certain credits and deductions that you might otherwise be allowed to take. So that's going to be a very individual choice. Family size is also part of the calculation, but family size is not determined by looking at your tax filing status or your dependence on your tax form or anything else. It has a separate definition, which is that you get to count yourself, student loan borrower. You get to count your spouse, whether or not you file your taxes jointly, and you get to count your children who depend on you for more than 50% of their income, whether or not they live with you. And then you also get to count other financially dependent members of your household. And that's how family size is determined, and then you report that information to the government. Here's an example to show you what kind of payments people might make under the income-based repayment plan. As I said, it's based on a person's adjusted gross income from their tax return and their family size. So let's say you were earning about $40,000 a year, and that was what you reported on your taxes. If you were a single person, you would pay $291 per month. And in my example, I'm using a person who owes $100,000 on their federal student loans. But in reality, the balance of the student loan does not affect the monthly payment. You do look at the debt in order to determine eligibility to choose income-based repayment in order to demonstrate that partial financial hardship, but you don't calculate that when it comes to the monthly payment amount. I've got 3 children and a husband, so plus me, that's 5 people. So if I had a $40,000 adjusted gross income, my payment would be $0 per month on those student loans. And as you can see, the payment amounts are higher for people whose incomes are higher. Now, pay-as-you-earn is the newest income-driven repayment option, and it is also the bestest. If you can get it. The problem with pay-as-you-earn is that it is not as widely available as income-based repayment. And I will show you how to determine whether you qualify to choose the newer pay-as-you-earn option. So the way the payments are established under income-based repayment is that they come up with this figure called discretionary income, using your adjusted gross income and your family size. And when they get that number, they establish your monthly payment at 15% of discretionary income. Pay-as-you-earn is more generous in that the payments are set at only 10% of discretionary income. And under income-based repayment, if you pay and still owe money after 25 years, then the remaining balance is canceled. Under pay-as-you-earn, the remaining balance, if any, is canceled at the 20-year mark rather than 25 years. And both repayment plans are qualifying repayment plans for public service loan forgiveness. So public service loan forgiveness is something we're going to turn our attention to, and it's measured by the number of payments you make. And you can make payments under either of these repayment plans and have them qualify for public service loan forgiveness. So the drum roll is whether you qualify for pay-as-you-earn or not. It's mostly just for more recent graduates. The way it works is that you've got to meet the definition of a quote-unquote new borrower. So it is limited to people who didn't owe any money on any federal loan on October 1st of 2007. So think about October 1st of 2007, cast your mind to that day, and reflect on whether you had a balance on a federal student loan or not. If you didn't owe any money, then you might qualify for pay-as-you-earn, but you have to meet the second prong, which is that you have to have borrowed a federal student loan sometime on or after October 1st of 2011. Okay, so you have to have not owed money on October 1st of 2007, and you have to get a new loan on or after October 1st of 2011. So if you say you started school in 2007 and you started borrowing right away, it's likely that you had a federal student loan that was disbursed in, August or September of 2007, in which case, unfortunately, you're out of luck. There isn't anything you can do to change whether you had a balance on a federal loan on October 1st of 2007. And if someone graduated, say you graduated from school in the spring of 2011, a couple of years ago, then it would be likely that you stopped borrowing your federal loans then, and that you didn't have any loans on or after October 1st of 2011. But unlike that first prong, on the second part, there's something you can do about it because it's still after October 1st of 2011, right? It will be after October 1st of 2011 forevermore, right? So if you borrow a federal loan sometime, that can meet that second prong. And, that's mainly would apply to folks who had loans from earlier that they had not consolidated. A consolidation loan can meet the second requirement. Another wrinkle of this pay-as-you-earn repayment plan is that it is only available for those newer federal loans, direct loans. Only available for direct loans. And as you can see, looking at this chart, the payment amounts are lower than under income-based repayment. So like we were looking at that $40,000 adjusted gross income, under pay-as-you-earn, the payment is under $200 a month at that income. So it's great if you get it, but as I said, unfortunately, it's quite limited in its application. And in order to get pay-as-you-earn or public service loan forgiveness for that matter, anybody who's got those older FFEL or FEL loans is going to have to take the extra step of consolidating those loans into the federal direct loan program. The URL for loan consolidation is here. It's also on the materials. The website looks like this, where you can go to do the loan consolidation. If you consolidate your student loans, you get a new federal loan called a federal consolidation loan. federal direct consolidation loan. And the consolidation loan repays the underlying loans and has an interest rate of the weighted average of the underlying loans. So what that does is it essentially preserves the cost of the loans, but it turns them into one loan. So you do lose your ability to target the higher interest rate debt first, for example. And people who have been making payments on their loans for a long time should really think about whether they've earned what's called a borrower incentive, because there are times when people have earned an interest rate reduction on those older FFEL loans. It's not super common, but if that was the case for you, you would lose that particular benefit by consolidating or reconsolidating into federal direct. So that's something to bear in mind. It's also possible, if you have very old federal loans from before 2006 that you have never consolidated, it's possible that you got federal loans at a variable interest rate. If that's the case, then you would want to give careful thought to consolidating in any event, because consolidating ends up making an interest rate fixed so that it will not change over time. And rates are good right now, so this is a time when it would make sense to consolidate. Most of you probably already have fixed interest rate loans, and so the reality is that consolidating is unlikely to make a big difference one way or another to your interest rate. Isn't going to give you much of a chance to improve it, and doesn't have much of an opportunity to really hurt you either. That is typically the case. All right, so turning to public service loan forgiveness. Yay! And then I'll take questions after this. So public service loan forgiveness is something that borrowers earn by making payments on their loans. A lot of us have heard that you have to do 10 years in public service in order to get public service loan forgiveness. But the reality is that it's measured by the number of qualifying payments you make, and you've got to keep that in mind. What you're looking to do is make 120 qualifying payments. And yes, 120 payments, one payment per month, would take you 10 years to do that. But they don't have to be consecutive. So for some people, it will take longer than 10 years. And you can't get credit for more than one payment towards forgiveness per month. So it has to take at least 10 years. But I encourage you to think about it in terms of the number of qualifying payments rather than to be thinking about it in terms of the number of years in public service, because working public service is only one part of it. And in fact, the way to get the forgiveness is to make the right kind of payments on the right kind of loans while you're working in that right kind of public service job. You've got to make those payments over and over again, 120 times, and you've got to demonstrate to the satisfaction of the federal government that you did those things. And all of that has to happen in order for you to get forgiveness. So a payment can't count towards forgiveness unless it is a payment made on the right kind of loan and in the right repayment plan while you're working in the right job. All of that has to happen. So talking about which jobs qualify and which do not, it's really kind of great that the qualifying jobs are very broadly defined. It does have to be a position that is considered full-time, and I'll define that in a moment. And it does have to be paid work. So volunteer work is not going to get you any closer to loan forgiveness, unfortunately. But the qualifying employers include the government and 501c3 nonprofits, in addition to a couple of other positions. So if you've got a full-time paid position for the government or a 501c3, it doesn't matter what kind of work you do. You could be working as a teacher or a librarian or a law enforcement officer or a social worker or a lawyer or whatever, as long as you were working for the government or a nonprofit, a 501c3 nonprofit. And government is defined very broadly. It's all of the state, local, federal, and tribal government. It includes agencies and entities, but it does not include elected members of the United States Congress. Other kinds of elected officials are included in the definition of government, just not U.S. Congress people. And bear in mind that if you're doing work on contract for the government, like many people do, that's not going to make you a government employee. You have to look and see for whom you are actually employed. So perhaps you would be doing it as a self-employed independent contractor. If you were self-employed, that's not a 501c3 and it's not the government. It's a regular private for-profit designation. And so you need to look at that. Full-time is defined as 30 hours per week on an annual average. So you don't have to work 30 hours every week, but you have to average 30 hours a week over the course of the year. You can put together more than one part-time position and have that count as a full-time position. For example, you could do 15 hours a week at one gig and 15 hours a week at another, and that would be fine. Now, if you're working for an organization that has their own definition of full-time, so you're working for a place that says, for example, you've got to work, 37.5 hours to be considered full-time, then you'd have to meet that higher standard if your employer had one. So it's 30 hours at a minimum, or whatever your employer considers full-time if it's greater. You can take leave, you can take, sick time, maternity leave, you can take your vacation. You can take as long as 12 weeks before you're considered to not be employed anymore. That's what's allowed under the Family and Medical Leave Act. And so that's what you can do. If you take off longer than that, whatever payments you made on your loans after that period would not count towards the 120, but you could always return to making payments that counted if you, for example, went back to full-time public service later. So, all right, so to get public service loan forgiveness, you've got to make the right kind of payments on the right kind of loans while you're in the right kind of job. As we talked about briefly before, those income-driven repayment plans are eligible plans for this public service loan forgiveness. So if you choose income-based repayment or pay-as-you-earn, the payments you make under that plan can qualify towards public service loan forgiveness, assuming you get the rest of the parts right. Be careful about which repayment plan you're in, because there are repayment plans that don't qualify towards public service loan forgiveness. Specifically, there are plans that are like for longer periods of time, like for 30 years. Those repayment plans are not going to count towards forgiveness. And it really, it's really unfortunate. There are plenty of folks who are right now working in public service and could be getting closer to forgiveness, but who have not yet gotten the information they need about, for example, switching repayment plans or making sure they have federal direct loans. And that is probably the most important and most misunderstood provision of public service loan forgiveness, which is that only direct loans, federal direct loans, are eligible for public service loan forgiveness. Only federal direct loans. So this is where you have to recall that there are two sources, or were two sources, of federal student loans. Loans before July of 2010 may have come from an older federal loan program called FEL, Federal Family Education Loans. You've got to check your federal student loan record on the National Student Loan Data System to ensure that you have federal direct loans. Or you need to consolidate in order to make your FEL loans into direct loans. And only then can you start making payments that count towards forgiveness. So the federal direct loans are the only ones that qualify for forgiveness. If you have those older FEL loans or Perkins loans, which are those campus-based loans, Perkins loans can qualify, but only after being consolidated into direct. And people with Perkins loans ought to recognize that Perkins loans have their own cancellation provisions. They're not, super common, but if you're a teacher or you do certain kinds of assistance for poor children, some people can get Perkins loans canceled directly through the school from which they borrowed them. Also available to a few folks who are in, for example, law enforcement. So recognize that Perkins loans would have to be consolidated into direct to be eligible for public service loan forgiveness. But before consolidating a Perkins loan, you'd want to evaluate whether you could qualify for any other Perkins cancellation that could potentially be more beneficial. And those private loans, those commercial loans, a lot of the lawyers I talk to have bar study loans that are private loans. Those are just plain old not eligible for public service loan forgiveness or the income-driven plans, unfortunately, no matter what you do. So recognize that consolidating to federal direct is going to make sense for some people, and everyone should evaluate and be totally certain whether or not it makes sense for them. Couple of other little kind of details they throw out about this stuff is that if your payments are received late, more than 15 days past their due date, then they're not going to count towards the 120. And you've got to send, monthly payments, because if you send, for example, a lump sum that's supposed to cover several monthly payments, that's just going to count as one payment, and isn't going to get you closer to forgiveness as well as if you had made 3 individual payments. And then the paperwork is going to be a bear. There will be an application for forgiveness that you will have to submit with documentation. That thing has not even been developed yet. What is available are the income-driven repayment application, in which you have to verify your income and your family size. Bear in mind that you're going to need to recertify those things every single year that you're in those repayment plans, whether or not you're trying for public service loan forgiveness. So the consequences for not recertifying your income are severe. You really need to keep on top of paperwork, and they'll send you a bunch of stuff and you've got to read it all and respond because the paperwork will require it. There is a process for certifying that you're in a qualifying public service position. There's a form you can download. It's on my website, which is askheatherjarvis.com. It's also available on the Department of Education website. It's a little trickier to find on there. And it's a good idea to do this so you can have your employer certify that you're in fact working for them, and then you can send that in and keep those records up. And then, as I said at the end, there will also be some application for forgiveness. So just to kind of recap for a second, and then we'll turn to Q&A. Everybody needs to kind of figure out what kind of loans you have. Visit the National Student Loan Data System and your annualcreditreport.com. Make sure you know whether you have federal or private student loans. Make sure you know whether you have older FFEL or FEL loans or direct loans or both. Understand what your interest rates are, your balances, all that kind of stuff. And then evaluate whether you qualify for income-based repayment or pay-as-you-earn. Figure out which one you qualify for and the differences. And look and see, what you expect from your income over time. And if you anticipate doing a career in public service, check and see to the extent to which you might benefit from public service loan forgiveness. Also, look to see whether your debt is so significant as compared to your income that you might benefit from the longer-term forgivenesses that are not tied to employment. And definitely important, double check and reevaluate periodically when things change. If you get a raise, if you get a promotion, if you get fired, God forbid, married, anything like that, you might have circumstances that would make sense for you to change. So my closing thoughts for you before the all questions, all answers, all day. I'm often asked by people whether you can count on public service loan forgiveness, whether these programs are secure. My thought is that public service loan forgiveness is quite secure as government programs go. It is not subject to the appropriations process, which means that it isn't part of the annual budget fights. So it operates more like an entitlement program, and the legislation that enacted it was part of a budget reconciliation process, which all that means is that it was evaluated and scored to be budget neutral. So you can't balance the budget by cutting this program. You can't reduce the deficit by cutting this program, and it's not the case that anyone in an administrative position can just choose not to fund it or cut it out of a budget. It would take an act of Congress to make a change. Now, Congress does change the student loan programs fairly often, but historically, when they make benefits less generous, they do that prospectively. So I am more concerned that that these programs may not always be available for new people who have not yet borrowed student loans. I don't worry too much that the rug would be pulled out from under folks like you. Although I'm not in charge, and I do think technically, Congress probably does have the authority to do it if they wanted to. So certainly there's no guarantee of anything in life. If you'd like, I have a mailing list. It's just a couple of fabulous emails a month, hardly anything. But I announce things like when, forms become available that you might need or changes to programs. And it'd be super great if you have a chance to go to my Facebook page at Student Loan Expert and like me, because apparently, according to everything I read, that's the key to my entire professional success. No, I'm just kidding. But I do, this stuff really is important, and it can help to get the word out to folks who might not otherwise understand it. And lastly, I meant to mention that unlike the income-driven forgivenesses, public service loan forgiveness is not taxable as income to the borrower. So that's good. Yay. Okay, so Sarah Jo's going to give me some questions, I think.
I am, and just want to say thank you again, Heather, for sharing your time and expertise with us. Often, we really need a voice like yours on behalf of students in Congress, and then also just to help dispel all the myths around it and help us actually, understand it. So we really appreciate it. I wanted to start with some of the most recent questions around the public service loan forgiveness, since we were just talking about that. And one of the questions is from Melissa. I've worked in public service since graduating college in 2005. I have student loans with a variable rate. Will loan consolidation affect my eligibility for public loan service forgiveness?
Well, Melissa, there's a couple of things to think about. You said you've started doing public service in 2005. That's great. I commend you for it. The first possible date that anyone can make a payment that counts towards public service loan forgiveness is October 1st of 2007. Because that's when the statute took effect. So there's no way that you get credit for any of the service you did before that. And the question we want to determine is whether you get credit for the payments that you've made since that date. So the questions we have to ask are, were you in the right repayment plan, and were your loans in the right place, being the federal direct program? So unfortunately, many of us have those older FFEL loans, and so there are a lot of people who were making payments but who just didn't get any closer to forgiveness because their loans would have need to have been consolidated before they could start getting closer. But you need to double check that by visiting the National Student Loan Data System. And you can consolidate or reconsolidate into Federal Direct if you're not already there. And you would have to, before any payment can even start to count towards forgiveness. You then also have to choose income-based repayment, or you wouldn't be, I would assume, not be eligible for pay as you earn because of when you were in school. So the other thing you want to look at, Melissa, is whether your debt-to-income ratio is going to be sufficient to meet that partial financial hardship determination under the income-based repayment plan. Unfortunately, a lot of us who are more experienced and who went to school some time ago, we also don't have as much ability to benefit from public service loan forgiveness because we have oftentimes more private student loan debt and less federal student loan debt because of the limits on federal borrowing that that were in place, especially in the past. So those are the things you want to think about. And one final thought on that before we go to the next question, Sarah Jo, is that if you had made payments that counted towards forgiveness, so let's say, for example, you did have a federal direct loan and you were in an eligible repayment plan while you were working in public service, at that point, reconsolidating or consolidating could harm your ability to earn forgiveness, because if you consolidate a loan that already had some payments made that counted towards forgiveness, then the loan, that underlying loan, no longer exists. It has been repaid by the consolidation loan. And so it's not a good idea to consolidate loans that have already established payments towards forgiveness. So that is the last thing that I would say you need to evaluate before you do anything.
Fantastic. This is some really great advice. And I see a few people have a few questions, so I'm going to try and bundle those together. And I see Jet Winkler has two questions. If you work 30 hours in a qualifying organization and additional contract work, will you be considered eligible for the public service loan forgiveness? And then that follow-up question, would the definition of public service organizations also include the United Nations or international NGOs and other non-US based service organizations? Or is the overall provision that one must work for a US organization or government?
So you may moonlight in a non-qualifying position. So as long as you meet the full-time public service requirement, it's all right if you have other jobs that are not public service jobs. The only way in which it will influence your forgiveness is that any income you earn from any source will be included in your adjusted gross income on your federal tax return, which will in turn influence your monthly payment amount as determined under the income-driven repayment plans. So the more you earn, the more you have to pay on your student loans, and therefore the less ultimately would be available to be forgiven. But it does not disqualify you for forgiveness in any way. As far as whether the UN in particular and other international positions qualify, the answer is, as every answer is, it seems like it depends. So there is no requirement that you have a desk in the United States. The question, as the answer, as the question indicated, is going to depend on the nature of the organization for which you work. So there are a number of positions abroad that would qualify. For example, if you were working for the United States government and stationed abroad, or for a US-based 501c3 and stationed abroad. But there are a number of positions that will not qualify. Nonprofit organizations that are not organized in the U.S. that do not have United States 501c3 tax status will not qualify, no matter where you work. So if you're working for a nonprofit that is organized in another country, your employment for them does not qualify. Neither would your employment for a foreign government. And if you want some more info on that, I have a blog post on my website. Just search for like international employment in the search box at the top right, and it'll take you to it, and it's got a fair amount of detail. UN in particular seems to me like a potentially some people who work for the UN will qualify and others may not, depending on the section for whom they work. Sarah Jo, I do not hear you.
Yes, I'm here.
Hello.
I think what happened, I lost your sound for a minute, and then it sped up, and so I thought I just figured you were still answering a question. My apologies.
No worries.
Brittany, are you there?
Yeah.
Okay. We have a question for Brittany that's, do you have to enroll in the Public Service Forgiveness Plan off the bat, or is it something you try to qualify for after 120 payments?
Yeah, so you do not have to make any kind of declaration that you're planning to get it. You can start making payments that count towards forgiveness as soon as you have your loans in Federal Direct and in a qualifying repayment plan and you're working in the eligible employment. But you are allowed to, it's not technically required, but it's smart to annually certify your employment. And once you do that, then your loan servicer will start tracking the payments you're making that count towards forgiveness, and that's a really smart thing to do. But you can start doing that at any point. There's no particular time requirement.
Fantastic. And let's see. While we're doing this, I'm going to put up our guide that, and we'll come back to and do more questions, but I just really want to also gather folks' feedback, and if you could fill out this very, very short survey for us, we'd really, really appreciate it. We're always looking for ways to improve our programming at the Foundation Center. And I have, let's see, a question from Riley. Is there a benefit to public service loan forgiveness or putting loans into forbearance? Seems like two.
Well, so public service loan forgiveness can be very beneficial for some people. The more debt you have as compared to your income, the more you stand to gain from public service loan forgiveness. It's really best for people who are interested in careers in public service, because you do have to do a full 10 years worth of service or more before you reach the 120 qualifying payments. Forbearance, forbearance used to be a very important tool for student loan borrowers who were in need of temporarily postponing payments. It can still be useful at times, but it is less important of a tool, because if the reason that you need a reduced monthly payment is your income, then choosing an income-driven plan is likely to be a better choice. Forbearance, honestly, today is used more administratively in order to, work out timing and deal with paperwork issues with regard to student loans.
Mm-hmm. And kind of a follow-up question to that, Melissa was wondering, can you make payments towards public service loan forgiveness while still in school, while you're still drawing student loans?
Yeah, so it may be in some narrow circumstances, but it's going to be tricky. So typically not, because when you borrow a student loan, it doesn't enter a quote-unquote repayment status until after you have used the grace period on the student loan and chosen a repayment plan. So if there are loans that you are borrowing right then at that time to pay for that program and that you're studying, then those loans you would not have used the grace period, would not have entered repayment, and although you can send money and make payments whenever you want, those payments are not going to count towards forgiveness because your loan is not quote-unquote in repayment. But you can imagine a circumstance in which you would have, for example, used your grace period, entered repayment, been making payments on a loan, and then went back to school or went into a grad program or whatever. In that case, the difficulty with making payments that count towards forgiveness is going to be that the loans are automatically deferred while you're a half-time or more student. And that, in my opinion, ought to be an optional deferment, and I don't see anything in the law that indicates that it would have to be required. But in reality, it's an automatic process. And so what you're going to find is that even if you can get your loan kicked back into repayment and make a payment that counts towards forgiveness, they're going to continue kind of put you through this system where they put you back in deferment. That's still something I'm trying to solve. If that's your circumstance, let me know, and maybe there's some other resources I can direct you to try to see if you can get that figured out.
Fantastic. And I'm looking at the time, and unfortunately, I don't think we're going to be able to get through everyone's questions today. But you did put up your contact details. And if you haven't been to Heather's website, it's fantastic. It's so clean and well laid out. You'll easily be able to find out how to contact her. Let's see. So Renee is wondering, do you sign up for income-based program and public service program together or separately?
Separately. So there is an income-based repayment application. There is an electronic application on the studentloans.gov site that you can use, and then there really isn't any sign up for public service loan forgiveness, except that once you've been in a public service job a while making payments, you can and should file the employment certification form. But yeah, they're set because lots of folks can benefit from income-based repayment who are not in public service, although, everybody who's going to benefit from public service loan forgiveness is also going to be in one of those income-driven repayment plans. And just one more thing, Sarah Jo, for everybody, and then I know we've got to run, and ask that they please fill out the survey. On my website, there's a forum that has tons of Q&A, and a lot of these questions are already answered there. You're also more than welcome to post new questions, and I'll be happy to get answers to you there.
Oh, that is just fantastic. I'm going to look for the link right now, and then I'll post it for everyone, because we're not able to get to everyone's questions today. There's a lot of, let's see, so here we go. So everyone should be able to click on that link at askheatherjarvis.com/forums. So thanks so much, Heather, for being here and sharing again your time and your expertise with our audiences. And thank you for everyone for joining us, and to fill out the survey if you haven't already. And to visit grantspace.org. I know maybe some of the questions might be around, well, how can I actually find some grants or scholarships so I don't have to work on the loan? Go to grantspace.org to one of those links that I posted, especially the grantspace.org knowledge base individual grant seekers, and there are questions around how do I find grants for my education or scholarships, and we have resources to help you with that. Thanks again. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Bye-bye.